Well, hello and welcome to franksworld.com stream. And with me today is Andy, and I'm looking for the lower third that has us both. There we go. Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard, hosts of Data Driven, which I might turn this into a podcast. I might take the audio and turn it into a podcast. What do you think about that? It'd be a good kind of festive stream and also kind of up to date on things. And it gives me some more time to put together another episode that I had a really good conversation with a guy who does red teaming for LLMs.
Nice.
So, which I think is a growth industry and certainly a wise career move. Speaking of career moves,
Good segue.
We have a first comment. SQL Dev DBA.
Hey,
hello.
SQL Dev.
Awesome.
So this may be the first time we've done this. This feature's been around for a while.
No, we did it like once or twice before.
Did we do it on Restream?
In like months. Yeah, that we've done.
Yeah. So we're sharing our audience. So Frank's audience, people that are connected to Frank, they're seeing this. People are connected to me are seeing this. It's like because it told me Frank started this, and then he sent me the link. And as I joined in, it said, "Hey, you can share this with on your channels as well." So I was like, "Oh yeah." Click that.
Oh, button. You know what it is? We did it the other way. You were the main, and then I shared it on my channels. That's what happened. That's what happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was cool though.
If you've never met me before, hello.
That's Frank.
Frank digs data on the socials and franksworld.com, datadriven.tv, which hopefully you know about that, and impactquantum.com. So
yep,
that's me. And so back to the segue.
Yeah.
I was talking about how security and AI is a good career move, and we were talking about, speaking of career moves, 'tis the season for SSIS is the title of the stream, and this kind of goes.
I'm sorry.
Come on, man, it's fun, right?
It's awesome.
So, and I had kind of done 2 live streams on this already, but one of them for like 10 minutes, I didn't catch the fact that I had no audio. And then yesterday I did one for 2 minutes and I catch the fact that I didn't do the audio. So I figured I'd bring the troublemaker himself onto here. Although strictly speaking, you're not the original troublemaker on this.
Well, I participated in it. I'll own my part of the trouble.
You'll own your part of the trouble. So
I definitely will. Yeah.
What's the background here?
Well, and I'll do a plug for andyleonard.blog. And if you go there, you can sign up for my newsletter over on the right side. It's kind of hard to read because the widget is a little narrower than it needs to be. But if you do that, or if you just look up Engineer of Data, I think it's engineerofdata.substack.com. But I put a newsletter out today kind of talking about it. Yeah, there's a site. Thanks, Frank.
No problem.
And you see the subscribe to my newsletter down there on the right. And there's a box on the left where you type your email address, and then on the right, you click it's free, and it should take you right over to Substack, which, by the way, I started using this year. And so far, I'm pretty impressed. It's been a really interesting experience for me. So the trouble, here's where the trouble happened. I have been reading. I caught a couple of articles just every now here and then, mostly on LinkedIn, where people would express an opinion about, SSIS stinks. I don't like it. It's old. It was so much trouble. And, they would just kind of poo-poo, share their negative thoughts about about SSIS. And I've worked in SSIS since really before it came out. I got to work on that Rocks book project with Brian Knight, and
I remember that book.
There was 10 of us. Yes, back when Rocks would put your picture on the cover of the book.
I have a copy around here somewhere.
Thank you, Frank. So I got kind of a boost out of my career, and I did an awful lot in SSIS for a long time. And every now and then I still do. I used to deliver training as part of solid quality learning is what it was called when I joined it, Solid Q. After that, I worked with them for a few years, and I delivered training developed by Eric Veerman. and also did consulting gigs. And I learned a lot about both data engineering and SSIS while I was doing both those things. When I left SolidQ, I think I put about a year or two between me and um, and the business. Actually, it was about 2.5 years because I went
Mm.
to work for Unisys then as a ETL architect.
I remember that. You were up in Reston quite a bit because that's where it was.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's now an apartment complex now, that building.
Oh, is it?
I think
Okay,
so, yeah.
okay. So Frank and I have been friends since the before times, even before SSIS came out.
That's
And
right. Well, no, I think you had just written the book at the time.
I'm trying to
I
remember.
think when you
So
just moved to Richmond is when I
it
met you.
was
It would have been
November of
it was sometime
2005.
December 2005, yeah.
Yeah, November
Yeah.
2005 is when we met, and another mutual friend that I won't name, but we're all still friends now. And the book actually was published in January, I think, of 2006.
Yes, that's right.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't quite ready for prime time. But oh, sorry, the book wasn't out. It was going through the process, and it takes a couple of months from the time all of the drafts are finished until they make a book out of it. It was my very first book project, and yeah, I'm pretty sure I was so excited. I was telling everybody I worked on a book.
Oh, yeah, 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 because it was for the Richmond Code Camp, which was in May, April of
Yep.
2006. Yeah, 2006,
Yeah, it was 2006. You and I
where I
and a
did
team, a
the
great team, by
developers
the
on a
way.
plane, and I had I photoshopped the guy carrying your book.
That's right. I do
Yeah,
remember that. Yeah.
I'll have to find
So
that picture somewhere.
I've been using SSIS for a long time. I would say I learned more about data engineering, the field, and did more projects probably in data warehousing where I used SSIS for the data engineering, data
And
integration.
I think it's important to,
You know,
one, explain for those who may not know what SSIS is, and two, explain that
yeah,
data engineering was not always seen as a discrete profession or
yeah.
skill set.
Data engineering is a relatively new word to describe what we do. It was
Right.
called it's part of business intelligence. Um, Back even before all that, I think the first term I heard was data acquisition, and it was sometimes that phrase was used standalone. Most often, at the time and this is what got me into databases, was doing system control and data acquisition, or SCADA systems. These were manufacturing systems where you collected data from instruments on the floor. You got to remember, IoT was, still somebody's dream back, in the
It was
1990s.
just
Nobody thought
IoT. It
about
was
it.
just OT back then.
It just was OT. You're right. It's funny,
It was
but we still did acquire data from plant floors and instruments that were mounted all over, but they weren't internet enabled at that time. They were most of them were hardwired. A few were using wireless, and so that's kind of what led me into this whole field. And the idea of the field is of data engineering, data integration, as we called it back then, is we do that data acquisition part. We go find wherever the data lives, we go find it there. And sometimes the data is a very static list. It could be even a text document created in Notepad that is tab separated, or delimited by character position or something like that. And a lot of old lookup data was that way. And I'm not making that up. It was maintained in a text file.
EDI.
EDI. Yeah.
So I got
Electronic
so,
data
so
interchange. Yeah.
so yeah, EDI is. I have interesting stories about EDI, but one of the things that really kept me away from the data space for a long time was I didn't want to be DBA, and this
Mm.
work I think had traditionally been kind of merged with DBAs,
Oh, absolutely.
but at
Yeah.
some
And
point, I don't know exactly when, it really evolved into its own discipline. And I
so that was
remember,
happening. Go
yeah,
ahead.
where because I remember I tried to get you a job at a particular company
I
that I
remember
was
that.
at, and
What do they do? And what was it? Well, why do we need a
you
DBA?
don't need a DBA, right? And I think the
I'm not a
term,
DBA. That was the funny part.
well, that was the fun. Well, we clearly did because at the time there was a project going on And I think the term data architect is what you just said. You were, I'm not a DBAM data architect.
Hmm.
And then that fell on deaf ears. And ironically, like not like a couple months later, there was a project that we worked on that so many stories, and I'm just trying to protect the innocent and the guilty, and myself from libel suits. But basically, there was a project going on that when it was basically kind of behavioral analysis of social networks, right? This is before Facebook. I think MySpace was
Sure.
around, that sort of thing. But it was basically the idea of organizational networking as a discipline. And it turned out that the software that we had bought off the shelf would actually query the database, bring everything back in from the database, and then run through the filtering on the C# components on the web server.
Gotcha.
So long story short, there was zero optimization, hardly any index. I mean, it was just a mess. A data
Yeah.
architect, we'll use the terms of the day, would have spotted this right away. We didn't, and it was just a massive disaster. And it's kind of one of those things where there were a number of projects that that company was taking on. Basically,
Yeah.
one of their core business models was brilliant. Actually, was software maintenance. So you have an
Yep.
existing application, outsource it to us, and we'll take care of it for you. And
Nice.
you know, it was really like an education in kind of Jenga programming, right? Where you had they wanted updates to this stuff, but they didn't want to pay to redo it, so you kind of like had to rip and replace stuff. And there's one
Sure.
particular instance where there was a SQL query that took like 14 minutes to bring back an answer, and I'm like, it's only like 30,000 records. Like, what's
Oh
the deal
my.
here?
Yeah.
And turns out there was no indexes, nothing.
Well, those indexes take up space, right?
Exactly.
Um,
I mean,
and
this is like why you should save
that's a
space
joke. That's a
for one
joke.
reason or the other. Like there was no indexes, and I was like, well, let's add
Right.
indexes, and like, no, we can't change the schema. Like, okay, so what
Uh,
I ended up doing was creating temporary tables with indexes, and then copying all the data, and I still got it down to 2 minutes,
nice.
which 1 minute and 59 seconds was copying the data, and then one
Wow.
second was actually changing.
Yeah.
So like
But
it was kind of like what I call Jenga programming or Jenga architecture, where you had to like they wanted updates, but you couldn't touch too much, couldn't change
right.
anything, couldn't improve anything, because it was just it was a time in my career that I think back of, and I've kind of learned many lessons, both hard lessons and soft skill lessons.
Sure.
But we digress. But
That's okay.
but
I was just gonna take that answering your question in my usual long-winded way. SQL Server integration services came along, and it was probably the again, it was the thing that spanned the longest part of my career. Before that, I worked with something called Data Mirror. That was the first, I'd say the first system like that, first bit of software that way. Before that, I was writing my own. So I was reading from these plant networks and writing to all sorts of stuff. I got into SQL Server because I crashed Access back in the 90s. So I collected 1,000 points of data every second for a long weekend. And I want to say the access file grew to about 4 gigs. And when I went to open it and start doing some analysis on it, it turned out it wouldn't open. So 4 gigs is nothing now, right? You can do that on a smartwatch. But back then, a server struggled to open a
even the
file that
file system,
size.
if you go back far enough, would have freaked out at anything over a certain size, unless it was like NTFS or something like that, right?
Yeah. And this wasn't. This was one of the other OSs. But so, I went to altavista.digital.com and
I
typed in
remember that.
Microsoft database, and I saw this listing for something called SQL Server, and that's how it all started. Well, then I got in as working on a data warehouse, and part of my job moved into the database part of it. I actually was hired to do the reporting piece of it, and lots of cool lessons learned there as well. But on the database side, they use Data Mirror. I think that company is still around. I'm not sure, but this is like 25 years ago, and it was so cool, and I was fascinated that somebody had built software to orchestrate this collection of data. I was like, wow, That is a good idea. You know, it always makes me feel better, Frank, when smart people come up with an idea that I've also come up with independently. It makes me feel like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. Go through all of that data transformation services, or DTS, and then finally SSIS and this big block. And what I've noticed, and I kind of noticed this trend started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. People complained about SSIS before that. Don't get me wrong, and a lot of it is because, are you sitting down? It's hard.
But
Not making that up.
comparatively though, like I remember when I was at barnesandnoble.com, and which is goes back a ways. So if you bought a magazine at Barnes and Noble between 1996 and probably about 2012, 13, and you interacted with the system I wrote back in
Nice.
the late 90s, or at least part of it anyway. So, that's how I learned EDI, right? Because we would
Right.
get these feeds from publishers, and literally a mainframe would dial up another mainframe, download the file over a modem,
Wow.
and this is how it worked. And what we did was we pulled down the raw EDI files, and I parsed it, and I had to do that and drop it into an Informix database. So I was
Oh, cool.
writing 4GL scripts to take that data in text format and then dump it into an actual
You
proper
were
table.
doing data engineering.
I was doing data engineering, which is kind of funny,
Yeah.
but data engineering as a discipline is not easy, right? So SSIS being hard, I mean, brain
Well,
surgery is hard too, right?
you make a good point about it, and it took me a while of especially teaching it, and
Right.
I would do a 4 or 5 day course, originally with Solid Q, and then eventually on my own. I wrote my own course. I found myself adding to Eric's content when I would deliver the material he had written. Don't get me wrong, Eric Veerman is still a genius. He was then, and he still is. I had a way of approaching some demos and examples that I felt kind of added to the clarity of the information we were sharing. I kind of expanded that out and wrote all my own material. I use my own data that I collect as part of my weather station here. And to this day, there are students that are going through recordings of that class. The last recordings I made were back in December 2020. And I recorded 3 courses on SSIS. The 4-day From Zero to SSIS course will take you from, if you can spell SSIS, to being a functional advanced beginner, low-end intermediate developer. And it was built for that. It's got labs, 12, 13 labs that you do in 2 days of that course. And then it kind of changes gears and goes to the care and feeding of SSIS and ancillary topics. So I learned a ton about the concepts of data engineering while doing SSIS training and consulting and development. So when I teach it, Frank, I share these concepts that I learned, because you got to keep in mind, this all came out around the same time as the Data Warehouse Toolkit book by Kimball and his crew. And in fact, I don't know what the relationship was between Microsoft and Kimball, but I do know from the horse's mouth that the data flow task in SSIS was modeled to load Kimball data warehouses. There was just a lot of functionality baked right in that targets those star schemas, and it's built to do that. There was that aspect of it. So at the same time, I'm reading and learning, and and then going out and teaching, and and consulting. There's this nice amalgam going on. I'm getting information from books. I'm applying that information on consulting gigs. I'm figuring out new ways to solve, problems I hadn't seen before. And then I'm training. So I'm just rolling all of that together. When I do the training, I'm sharing with people, hey, here's some first principles, if you will,
Right.
of data engineering. And we called it data integration in BI back then. And star schemas and why you use them and how they work, and kind of the trade-offs that you get. Data explodes a little bit. Talking about concepts like staging data, the benefits of it, like how you would want to build your staging tables. If you're reading from a flat file, everything in that file is text. Now, the text may be numbers, it may be dates, but it's really just text. So you build the stage tables and varchars. So stuff like that, because you want to get in and get out just as quick
or
as
in
possible.
memory. Another way to do it would be in memory, and then like do validation as you do the insert and things like that. There's 100 different ways to slice that.
There really are. But when you did that was just pieces and parts of saying, okay,
right.
I'm teaching you how to use this mechanism, if you will,
right.
SSIS, but I'm also sharing with you how you would use it, and then why you would use it that way. And so there's more to it than just the data engineering. And the point I wanted to make, thanks, Hector.
Merry Christmas to you too, Hector.
The data engineering all by itself, just that world, that's hard all by itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the tool itself was extremely flexible. And from the years that you and I have been sharing about stuff, anytime you say it's flexible, you're also saying that's the silent way of saying it's complex.
Right. And if it wasn't flexible, people would say that it's too simple. And like, it's just one of those things where now that I'm in a job where I am on the product group, what Microsoft would call it PG, a product group or team.
Yeah.
We call it a BU. I understand, like, there's only so many hours in a day that you have engineers, and there's time to market. You have to kind of make these trade-offs. And,
that's it.
I mean, I had this real eye-opening moment with I suspect was the guy who introduced us, who was an evangelist at Microsoft back in the day. And, I wanted some new shiny feature in Visual Studio 2005, and, I was complaining about it. And he kind of pointed out, like, look, even Microsoft has limited resources in terms of people, time, and testing and material and things like that. And I was like, my God, if Microsoft has that problem, then I guess everyone has that problem.
It turns out they're just a bunch of software developers, just like the rest of us.
Turns out they're all humans, although maybe now it's mostly AI. Who knows? But
it's getting there.
So I think we both kind of set the stage for the controversy here, right? SSIS has been around for at least 20 years, maybe 25. And SQL Server itself, let's remind folks the history of SQL Server. It was originally, who was it a partnership with? Sybase?
Yes. I believe it was a Sybase product completely.
And it was like version
Microsoft
6
got into the mix, and there was a collaboration or something, and then they ended up with it, owning it. That's my best guess on it. I know, I haven't spoken to her in a while, but I'm friends with and have co-worked with Kaylin Delaney, and she was with Sybase.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So, and did we have her as a guest on the show? I know we wanted to.
We totally need to, because that would be an interesting story. Because I first heard of SQL Server when I was at Barnes & Noble, because at the time we were ready to launch this is why I left Barnes & Noble. We're ready to launch by Christmas of '96 with a Linux or Unix based system based on Spark, Oracle, and a few other things. No, I'm sorry, 4GL. It was Formix. And we had the hardware, we had everything set up, and then as the story goes, Bill Gates and one of the Riggio brothers, who was the CEOs of, kind of co-CEOs of Barnes & Noble at the time, Bill Gates had kind of, I don't know what he'd done, Jedi mind trick, in August, September of like 96, basically said, no, we're ripping everything we've built so far and we're moving it over to Microsoft tooling, which at the time was not really mature. I mean, this was like InterDev. I think we had a beta version of Visual InterDev. Yeah. Which was not the best product at the time, right? It was,
I used it
at the time.
Yeah. I used it. And if you came from like Cold Fusion or some other development platform, yes.
Which was also awful. Yes. But yeah. So
I started on InterDev. In fact, that was the first tool that I remember downloading for Visual Studio. I don't think I downloaded it. I think I went somewhere and bought a CD or something.
Yeah. I think I found an InterDev 97 CD, which was
There you
the
go.
second or third
But
version. But I mean, like
you're
we had
right.
everything
Yeah,
written in CGI Perl scripts. Like we had
yeah.
everything, and it was just a very different era. But my take was, and this was I was at the meeting with the CEO and everyone. I was like, if we don't launch by this Christmas, people are not going to use us as a habit. Amazon will take the mind share and this and that. And
Oh wow.
then the CEO said, sit down, STFU, basically. You don't know how to
Mm.
sell books. You may know technology, but you don't know how to sell books. Now we can look back at Jeff Bezos' super yacht and his, moon missions and all
Well,
that.
those guys
And
have super yachts and moon missions, right?
they do not actually.
Oh,
And I
well,
mean, don't feel
why'd
too
that
bad for them. I'm
happen?
pretty sure they live in an oceanfront thing in Long Island, but um,
Wonder how
he
that
didn't know anything
happened.
about selling books online either. So I can sit back here, good God, almost 30 years later and kind of be smug about it, right?
Right,
But it's just funny, right? Like so what's
right.
interesting is, and I think this really cuts to the bone of what this controversy is. And I have the thing queued up. I can kind of show the screen where you posted it, where um, the fundamentals haven't really changed
Not
of
at all.
technology, right? Um,
Yeah,
binary is still binary. The debates about schema optimization and things like that are still very much the same today as they were 20 years. Now the numbers are bigger, the stakes are arguably
that's true.
bigger, but I mean, for the most part, the fundamentals haven't changed. And I would say this is really where it kind of boiled down to, and this is where the controversy starts. So buckle up, kids. Let's see. I will share the screen.
There's actually two. I think you talked
There's
about
two
one of them.
controversies. I'm only
Well, it's
aware of
two
one.
posts.
I'm
This
only
is
aware of one.
this is the one post, and I'll drop you the link to one
In
of
the
the
chat,
others.
right?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll put
okay.
it in the chat. I'll
So
send that to you here in just a second. Let
following
me.
along can understand. So this is
Sorry
what I
about that.
saw, and it
Yes,
was basically Kendra Little, who is I would say legendary. I think
Kendra's scary smart.
she's legendary in the sequel kind of family, right? Hashtag sequel family. Is that still a thing?
Yep, I think
So
so.
she's legendary. She used to work at Redgate. I think she worked at Microsoft too at a time.
I
And
think so, but I'm not positive.
well, we can look at LinkedIn. If only we had
We can do
access to the
that.
information. But anyway, so you basically, so if you read this, and she basically says, strong disagree. Don't run after every shiny thing. Again, that is good advice. But Lord, I would assume that is her saying, but Lord, don't learn SQL Server and SSIS if you want to be a data engineer. That's 2 decades too out of date. Sincerely, a SQL Server expert. I think that's a bit harsh. She's right about this part. Don't try and chase after every shiny thing. So apparently I
Yeah.
can't. Man, I can't select a thing. So I read that, and I know there's more controversies that are in there as I look at the thing. And you said, I humbly submit, data engineering may be accomplished even in the year of our Lord 2024 using T-SQL, this foul year of our Lord 2024, to borrow a phrase from Hunter Thompson. T-SQL, SSIS, ADF, Fabric Data Factory, and other technologies supported by Microsoft, which I thought, clearly Microsoft's not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so I basically said, fundamentals never grow out of style. Then I think I wrote again somewhere, like, when I looked at the context of it, because that's not what you're supposed to do apparently in social media. You're supposed to react right away. And
I
then,
did that, by the way, Frank. I'm guilty. I did not go look at the
so
context.
this is the
I just
original
saw the
context.
note. And you pointed that out, and I'll be honest. I'm still running on secondhand information. I have not yet clicked it and gone back to
Well, now you can see.
Ergast's post. Now I can see it,
Now you can
and
see. So
and
this is
you
what struck me
mentioned,
as, well, this is what struck me as odd. And I know we had talked about it,
yeah,
and I had talked about it, you had talked about it, we talked to each other about it, we talked to our dogs about it. I don't know, but it was kind of like, so when I read the thing, it gets even stranger, right? So
yeah,
he was talking to someone, and I guess strictly speaking, even this is secondhand knowledge, right? But so that's the data scientist in me. Like, well, strictly speaking, this
Hmm.
data is also so. All right, so looking to someone to get a job as a data engineer. Okay.
Right.
Unfortunately, he was learning about LLMs and other ML stuff. And I'm like, that's not data engineering. That's a AI engineering or data science type work. That's more
And I
like,
think he's trying to set him straight from that. He's like, you're learning the wrong things. That's how I read those two
well,
sentences.
I mean, I would say you're learning the right things if you want to be an AI
Fair.
practitioner.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't, read up on LangChain, Olama and anything LM and all that stuff, and then call myself a data engineer. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a cardiologist cutting open, doing your taxes. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
or cutting open your brain. Like, I mean, I suppose there's some similarities, but it's not the same.
Well,
And
I do like bullet number one.
yeah,
You
now
know, I
this
see that. Yeah.
this is something I think that you point out quite a bit is that when you give your talks, either on SSIS or ADF, you ask people like, how many people here have workloads running in the cloud, or right, and then
Yeah.
only a quarter of the hands go up.
Well,
That
it
still
grew to
true?
about 40% the last time I did it, but it's been over a year since I spoke live and asked that question, ran that little survey. There's a slide usually hidden in all of my presentations that has survey up near the very top.
Right.
You know, it just and that's what the survey is about. And often, especially say the last, I said it's been over a year. So let's say from a year ago and then back maybe 4 years of asking that question. Almost every time I did that and people didn't see everyone else's hand go up but theirs, those people would come up to me at the end. And usually their first comment was, I didn't know that it was most of the people here were not doing production jobs in the cloud at this point with data. I thought we were way behind and we're the only ones. And my response would be twofold. The first would be that's because Microsoft marketing is doing an astounding job. That is not a swipe at Microsoft marketing. If anything, they deserve a raise because they were so effective at communicating how cool this is
Right.
and how these larger companies are doing it. All of the big shows, keynotes, there's some list of big companies, and they're almost all of them are companies that you'd want to work for because it's prestigious. So
And the
kudos
Fortune
on
100, they
Microsoft
make it seem
marketing.
like everybody's doing it, and I
That
know
is
I know for a
exactly it.
fact it's not always true because when I
And,
worked
and
in
that's,
sales for
yeah,
Microsoft, we would encounter them, and there was a pejorative term used internally called server huggers,
okay.
right? Because like, oh, they're server huggers, they'll never go to Azure, right?
I
Or they'll
like
never do
that.
this. So now, I used to see that as server hugger as a pejorative. Now, in light of kind of maturity and working with more customers and being more aligned in the open source kind of realm and dealing
Yeah,
with international customers who have very real regulatory concerns,
you're right.
call them smart, right? It's not this, I what didn't so much drink the Kool-Aid is I became one with the Kool-Aid. You couldn't tell where I ended and where it began, where I kind of had this programming experience of
Yeah,
cloud's not always the answer, right? And I think that dealing with
yeah,
LLMs and AI and things like that, I think really makes that more obvious, right? Um,
yeah. I totally agree with that. And to be fair, and I want to start with with being as positive as I can about this. If I
no,
was
it's not a
starting
negative on
from
anyone. I
scratch,
just
no,
want
it
to, yeah,
wasn't. No, I was
yeah,
just saying. But if I'm starting today, day one, and I want to go start a company and work with data, it would be foolish to start today and not go to the cloud.
absolutely.
So,
And
and
that's who
and the
really
reasons
goes
are
there.
numerous.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: the companies, there are a handful of companies, really large companies, mind you, that have started in the cloud age. Let's just call it that, or the internet age. There's a small number of them that have gone on to be huge, and they are really huge. They're overpowering, oversized. They're larger than the companies that are previous to the internet age companies that have made their way into the internet, and that's not an accident. However, those companies, the brick and mortar companies, are the companies calling consultants like me and asking me to help them either transition from a purely on premises environment, managing their data, into a cloud environment. Or, and back before that, in 20 years ago, when I was first getting called to do this kind of work, they were just trying to figure out how to collect their data and then analyze it. And so, SSIS was a great way to do that. T-SQL was everywhere. Azure Data Factory didn't exist yet, much less Fabric Data Factory. And so we were just trying to solve this business problem. And I was trying to couch my responses, especially there was a thread that got combative, I would say. And as we went down through that, and I kept trying to say, and I did, I said over and over again that my job is to go help solve these business problems. And what I meant by that opening line, that T-SQL, SSIS, Azure Data Factory, Fabric Data Factory, even in 2024, are viable ways to accomplish data engineering. I meant that. And I'm not backing off that for 1 minute. I misunderstood the context of the question. And I didn't really understand until I listened to your stream last night, where you had gone back and done what I should have done and read the original post. And you said, yeah, it's kind of a mixed mesh post. The guy's talking about data engineer, but he's also talking about LLMs and machine learning. And in the middle of that, he throws out, this comment about SSIS, how 99.5% of the companies are still using it. I think that estimate is high. I think it was more of a, let's make this point, that there's still a lot of companies out there using T-SQL and SSIS to accomplish this stuff.
And this is something that I can't find the comment that I put in there. I'm looking for it now, but
yeah, some of the comments I can't get to anymore. I don't know why.
Maybe they were reported, or maybe they're. Who knows, right?
I don't know.
Social media does weird things to people's psychology, but the point that I think that I want to say that Kendra overlooks, I think everyone overlooks it. Data and back-end systems have a longer shelf life. And I say this as someone who was, 10, 15 years ago, strongly ensconced in client development, right? Whether it was for Windows Phone, or other types of Windows-based devices, right? Or web development, right? Those technologies turn over pretty quickly, right? You're likely to get multiple updates per year on a device phone, like an app on the device, but you're likely to never see a radical change or redesign. You'll see a radical change or redesign of a website or portions of a website a couple of times a year, maybe, right? But you're never going to see a radical redesign of a data backend system, but once or twice a decade. And
it's true. Yeah. And mostly what drives that is scale, not features.
Right. Not features.
The data
or features exactly. Right. So
it went to 100x, and who could have counted for that? When the project started, it's a problem, still a wonderful problem to have, but a problem nonetheless.
Well, and there's also the fact that, it's 2000 whatever now, and there's still mainframes running, right? There are still, not to knock on IBM too hard, because they are the parent company of Red Hat, but DB2 is still around, still getting updates, still a backbone of many Fortune 100 companies that also share the stage with Satya at these big Microsoft events too, right? Like,
which was mind-blowing for people from the old days of Microsoft, right?
Well, that's a whole other thing, but but I mean, it really boils down to, like, these technologies have a longer shelf life. So if something's 20, I think we get hung up, one of the sub-threads in here gets hung up on, 30, 20-year-old technology. We're thinking that, well, there's a meme of the little monkey puppet, like, giving a side eye, and then goes like a cringe face, like, and a side eye, where it's like, oh, Windows is, 40-year-old technology. And I'm thinking, like, some, Unix people or Linux people are like, 40 years old is old, I mean, this stuff goes back much further. So it's still like, and that's not a knock. It's just, it's just now that we're in this industry now for as long as we've been in it, and the industry's been around longer this long, there's just
Yeah,
stuff that is gonna just start aging out, but it doesn't age out as quickly as we think it does. It's not like the iPhone,
sure.
right? Where the iPhone, I don't know what number are they up to, 16, 17, right? Oh, well, suddenly my iPhone 15 looks bad, and that happens every year or two. You don't
Yeah,
see that in database systems, right? The only impetus to really move, say, from like SQL Server 2005 to 2019 is updates stop going, right? And that's a whole big
well,
project.
yeah, the maintenance cycle.
The
So it goes
maintenance
out of
cycle.
maintenance, and then you worry that if something crazy happens, you can't get support for it. And that's kind of like, it's sort of I'll say this, it's analogous to your phone starting to run slow for some unknown reason.
That's funny. Something something on SQL.VBA. Something something Sybase something. Well, and you think about all the, and contrary to this, contrary to that statement of these things have long lives, shelf lives,
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
fact that I mentioned Informix earlier. Raise your hand if you've heard of Informix, right?
So
Um,
I've heard of
you've
Informix.
heard of Informix. Well, I mean, we don't count, but like, no, but like, I remember my first experience with Informix was because some alum of Fordham was a big shot at Informix, and I think we had somebody who was also a big shot at Silicon Graphics. So we had SGI machines running
Yeah,
Informix, right? So I remember my first Unix I used was an IRIX system, right?
nice.
Which most people today wouldn't even know what that means, right?
Right,
And
right.
but Informix is out of business, Sybase is gone. I can't even think of other names. I know there's more, right? So, but really,
Yeah.
the only things those have probably been migrated to SQL Server or Oracle,
Well, yeah,
or some form of Postgres or something like that.
and I hear you. There's an argument to be made for the costs of maintaining old software.
Right.
There definitely is. Um, I'll say this about SSIS. If you learned SSIS in probably in 2005 era, between 2005 and 2008, that engine, uh, I don't know how many lines of code were changed before it was upgraded to 2008 or R2, but it changed. There were some performance tweaks in there. It was obviously faster.
Oh
And
God.
then again, that happened in the 2012 era when we saw, I love that SQL dev. And,
Crystal is dead. Long live Crystal. So was Crystal ever a
right?
database, or was just Crystal Reports?
Reports is all I knew. I didn't know about it
Ugh,
as a database.
that's all
I used Crystal Reports, and my favorite thing was it filling up the drive because it kept caching things. Um, but
I remember the whole idea of just because you place it somewhere doesn't mean it's actually going to end up there. Like the whole
ain't that the
rendering was
truth?
just. But sorry, I
But
cut you off.
that's okay. But SSIS in general, if you learned it, even in 2006, came out in November, I think, of 2005. Um, Even if you learned it then, it at a fundamental level, it hasn't changed that much. And whereas you'll see other software, Visual Studio is a software development platform that allows you to do C# and VB and all of the stuff, and it still supports, as far as I know. I haven't tried VB in 9 years now, so it's been a while. But if you look at how much most software changes from a developer perspective, and SSIS is software development, so is Azure Data Factory, and any data engineering, that's software development. SSIS is probably in the 95% of what it was. If you knew the fundamentals in 2006, you know those fundamentals in 2024. And
Right.
part of the decision to go make the upgrade, we talked about, maintenance windows and stuff, and I get it. And it's not the same as your phone slowing down. I said that, but that's a bad analogy. But
Well,
at this,
it's also I think also very relevant to Windows 10, right? If you're on Windows 10, your updates are going to stop in
oh,
October,
that's
and
true.
I don't want to get on that soapbox and rant
Sure. No, but
again.
I mean, and I get reasons for that as well. I don't like that it's going to change because I like Windows 10, but yeah, well, I'm going to join you in not going down that road. But I'll say this:
Roger
Hey,
that.
Mehdi, how are you? The just the fundamentals of data engineering haven't changed. And the tool itself, if you knew it back then, and you know it now. And so if you learned it now, you could go back then and still work in the previous versions of it with very little headache. And that speaks volumes to the team that designed and built that. And so in addition to the technical reasons for doing this, the business reasons kind of revolve around one of my favorite phrases, and I mentioned this in today's newsletter. It's a compelling reason. Do you have a compelling reason to make this change? And business people think about this all day, every day, because the amount of money that they make, the profit, is based directly on the amount of money that they spend, and are they getting this value for it? So if they can improve the performance of something, say 10 times, and a result of that is they get 5 times as many customers, then that's not a bad investment. That'll just work. But if you're coming to me, and I'm a business that existed before the internet, if you're coming to me and saying, I want you to change to this completely different model, where, and the way it's presented often is you can save money. And that's true, because if I start a new business today, I couldn't even compete. I'm not going to be able to stand up the servers, take that time and buy that hardware and float that inventory that I need to manage all that. Whereas I can pay rent essentially every month on that service, right?
Right. I always like to say, if I wanted to start a bookstore today, right, versus 1996, right, or 1995, depending on when you want to say when they started. I mean, Barnes & Noble spent a ton of money. I don't have an exact number, but it's probably tens of millions of dollars, probably closer to $100 million, to just before they had their first customer, right?
Wow.
And that was the heyday of the .com, right? Because they were, but
sure.
But if you wanted to start a bookstore today, whether or not that's a good idea, let's just suspend our disbelief for a second. You could probably do it on an average credit card limit.
Because your IT is enabled.
Right.
And you pay, like I said, you pay fractions of what you would have to do in the brick and mortar physical world.
And most of the initial spend isn't going to be your servers or hardware. It's going to be in development and marketing, right? Getting the word out, because it's such a noisy market. The market is radically changed. And I also
think go ahead.
I'm sorry, what? Imagine?
I was going to say, imagine that you've built this infrastructure on premises already. You've got all of this done. It's a sunk cost. We can debate about how to feel about sunk costs, but it's there. You spent the money and it's there. And you're not going to get that 5x income boost when you move to the cloud. In fact, in some cases, not all by any stretch, but in enough cases, you move to the cloud and it costs you money. Because when you're getting the presentation about using the metrics of a new company being started today,
right,
you're told the truth. You're not being lied to at all in any of this. But often systems that were designed, software and front end, back end systems that were designed, from the 90s through the early 2000s, those systems were architected in a whole different mindset of what's the prevalent mindset for today. And as a result of that, as a result of that, one of the things missing from the spreadsheet calculation that you're going to get the ROI from moving off your on-premises servers to the cloud is that couple of $1 million and about 18 months of the hit that you're going to have to spend re-architecting all of your systems so that they now fit today's paradigm. And frankly, if you were interested in doing that, you could go do that you could have done that at any time in the last 10 years and made that shift. But people didn't do it because the business people didn't do it because the ROI was not there. There was not enough return on that investment. If they wanted to, they would have spent that money then, but it wasn't going to improve the bottom line. In fact, it was going to hurt the bottom line. And so you see companies now make this move into the cloud. And then, yes, that is That's an astute question to ask.
So for those that
And
may be listening and not viewing this, he says SQL Dev DBA says I use Brent, and I'm assuming Brent Ozar's.
Brent
What
Ozark, yes,
problem are you trying to solve by changing this for justifying upgrades? Brilliant.
that is brilliant, and he's right. And but it's compelling to hear and read the case studies of companies that were able to do you know, to access $10 million worth of hardware, like you said, on a credit card, and think, wow, what would that do for us? And the answer is sometimes, yeah, it'll revolutionize your business. You'll 10x coming out of this, but other times it's like, no, you'll 0.8x,
Yeah, and that's
which
just it,
isn't as
right?
compelling.
So it's interesting because, like, I think there's a number of, and I found the article. I'll pull it up. But one of the examples, it was either Dropbox or Box. I forget which company it was, but they had basically started off, I think, in AWS,
Hmm.
and then they got to a certain size. They actually figured out it's cheaper for them to design their own servers that are optimized for mass storage
Hmm.
than doing it. So they started building their own hardware and their own stuff. But I could tell you, if they were a startup and they went to a VC saying we want to start with this on prem, they would have been laughed out of the building.
Yep.
You know,
Today, yes.
today they would have. They mean it was, and it's it just shows that the shifting economics of cloud versus on prem and other
Yep.
types of things that I don't think people really have figured out yet. So this was a really interesting. I'm going to share this tab if I can show it on the screen. Sources.
But
There we
that
go.
that use case is you can't, having the compelling reason to migrate to the cloud, and you can do that up front. It's
Right.
harder, but exactly what you're showing there, you're sharing that idea of leaving the cloud. That's growing, and it's growing across the board. And one of the metrics for that's directly related to what we're talking about here today with data engineering, is that there's been an increase in 2024 in the number of people that reach out to me to talk about SSIS, help with their
Hmm.
systems. And I mean, I do consulting in ADF and Fabric, and most of my consulting has been in ADF. When SSIS was involved, it was in lifting and shifting SSIS into an Azure SSIS integration runtime. But all of a sudden, after 2, 3, 4 years of that shifted this year. And people started reaching out to me with SSIS on premises consulting things, and I kept up with it, so I was able to do it. And but there's other evidence that I will not share. I may be able to, but I'm just not going to. But it's even better evidence than my anecdotes about more people reaching out to me,
Right.
that the amount of SSIS being executed in the world has increased, and it's a double-digit percentage increase just in the past few months. And I
Right.
I think now this is where I start speculating, and I don't know the answer to that, but we have our mutual friend that we another mutual friend you and I connected with in November 2025. Sorry, 2005.
Like in the future.
Recently worked for a year and a half, 2 years for this large agency that's not part of the government but does money supply stuff.
Oh, okay.
After
I know.
getting
I
his
know who you
after
mean.
getting his MBA from Sloan, which
Mhm.
Sloan, Sloan is important. The
MIT
business
for the
school at
kids that
MIT,
are trying to follow. Yeah.
right?
He's a
Yeah,
super smart
graduated
guy.
with that.
Yeah.
Super smart. He shares with me when I'm telling him this story. I give him that stat, and he says, "Here's what's going on. Economically, money is more expensive today than it was." And so he said that as he's telling me this as a cautionary tale, because he says it's going to change. Money's going to get cheap again, and people are going to flock back to the cloud. That's his theory, that it's all being driven by money. And I don't think he's wrong,
I
especially
think that's
coming
one
from
lever. I
him.
think that's one lever. I think there's more than
Yeah.
one lever. That is certainly a big one. But as someone who in my previous role at Red Hat and my current role at Red Hat, I have to think
Mhm.
globally, right? And again, not a commercial for Red Hat, even though the Fedora is there. One of the things we do is we basically provide a data platform end to end that can run in any cloud, on-prem, or one of the
Or
hyperscalers,
hybrid. Yeah. Yeah.
or hybrid, right? And there
Yeah.
was one customer that I spoke with before I went on paternity leave. They were big government agency, and this big government agency, um, they have their own data centers, even though there was a push to get rid of them all. But they also have, because of the way government contracts work in the U.S., they had money to spend in AWS, money to spend in Azure, and I think even money to spend in Google Cloud.
Hmm.
So the one advantage that we had that the other ones couldn't is that he called them the soft costs of training people how to do the same thing, to do linear regression in SageMaker and push the model to production in SageMaker and Azure and in Google, right?
Yeah.
And this was one tool. You learn it once, you administer it once, the same glass. It was the same thing. I think those environments are very real. Now, those are probably limited
Yep.
to large customers or kind of the government agencies that have these kind of contracts and things like that.
Yeah.
But also,
Yeah.
you have a number of countries that it's just not a good look to move your data out of country. Right now in the US and Canada, we don't have this issue because there's plenty of all the hyperscalers have footprints in Canada and the US.
Right.
But if you're in Latin America, which is where this example comes from, right? There's only, at least as Red Hat defines Latin America, includes Mexico and basically all the way down to Antarctica.
Hmm.
And only there's like 30 some odd countries, right? Someone's going to write me hate mail saying that this is the exact number, but let's just keep the math simple. It's 30,
We
right?
love those mail,
We
by the
do.
way.
We love the mail.
We learn things every time.
Right.
I talk about them personally when I get corrected at the dinner table because I want to share that with
No, I
them.
mean it's
I'm
good. I'm
being
not saying don't
sarcastic.
do it. I'm just trying to keep the math simple because it's Friday before, basically
That's
everybody
true.
holidays and all
Sorry,
that.
Frank. I derailed you.
No, that's fine. Only 3 countries from Mexico down to Antarctica have hyperscaler presences. Now, there's a
Wow.
fourth one but out of 30, right? So it's actually 10% or less realistically. I think it's like 37 countries. I asked Wikipedia and stuff like that. So less than 10%, right?
Right.
If you're in a country that doesn't have a footprint,
If you're in that 90%,
um, you
you
have to
got
be
to ship it
okay.
out of the
You
country.
have to be okay with that, or roll your own solution on a thing. So there was a government. We won a big contract because they wanted to do advanced AI and they wanted to keep it in country. Right? Doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
have to be on prem. It could just be like an Equinox data center down the street or something like that.
Right. Right.
But within their thing, and it was a government agency, so it wasn't computer science or even data science. It was political science that really kind of was the driver there, right? Because if I'm in country X and and I'm a government agency in country X, I have to move my data to a sovereign country Y. Not a good look,
Yeah.
right? And it, would it really matter? I don't think so. But from a legal point of view, it kind of does. Like where the data resides, the residency. And I think if you go to the Azure website now, they'll actually tell you where the data resides. And they actually, interestingly enough, they get down to granular, at least on the US side, to the state, right? So like it'll say, Virginia and stuff like that. We have a comment from I'm going to hide my screen so I can look up the Azure map and kind of
Okay.
demonstrate that. And then I have to figure out where the sources are. There we go. So you want to read the comment while I do that, while I'm distracted?
Sure. So many comments, but there are clients who are considering the technology used in the software package, and they may escape when they see the old school stuffs. I'm so maybe, and that may be I hate to be that guy that says, "Oh, that use case is invalid." I don't think so. I'm not aware of it. That doesn't mean it's invalid. I'm not aware of a lot of things, um, but maybe, and definitely have mixed emotions about that. If you're buying because if you're a client and you're buying from some company and you decide to go to a different company because of the technology stack that's being used behind there, um, I don't know. I think that says more about you as a client than it does about the company. If they're delivering the service and it's the rules of data engineering are you get accurate data as fast as possible, and those priorities are in that order.
Yeah, and I think
Accurate
the old
first,
school stuff,
fast second.
the only
Yeah.
risk of the old school stuff is it's still maintained or there's still security packages. That would, I
That's
mean, if
fair.
I were in that position, I would be like, oh, I mean, if you're still using, say, Sybase 6, right? You're like,
Yeah.
God only
I
knows
think
how
there's
many.
definitely a line there, and
Right.
it's drawn different places first. And some of the reasons that it is drawn in different places is security is huge these days. I mean, that's got to be your number one concern. Um, and it goes from there. But if you're delivering the service securely, I'll just pick that one. Then I would say that that if you lose a client because you're not using the new shiny, um, I don't know what you can do about that. I'm trying to think. I'm not going to say the client's wrong for feeling that way. They probably have valid reasons for feeling that way. But
Right.
if they want to make that decision based on that, and I'm looking at Frank's graphic here of is that the data centers
This is the one I was telling you
globe?
about, right? So this is just Azure, but I would say it's a pretty good proxy for the other hyperscalers, right? Um,
Hmm.
I would say Azure at one point had more. I haven't kept up. That was one of our talking points when I worked at Microsoft, right? We have more than
Mm,
AWS, right? But I would say if it's not exactly more, it's close enough, right? So there's
yeah,
Mexico. You see, the United States is pretty well covered. So is Canada, right? So if
yeah,
you were a Canadian company, you had to keep it in Canada. You had an option, right?
yeah.
If you're an American company, you have pretty good choices. If you're in Mexico, yep. But if you're in any of these countries in Latin America,
Down
you
through South
basically only
America.
had, okay, so now there's Chile. Okay,
Gotcha.
right? So I'm sorry, now there's four. Um, so my math is going to get more complicated right away, right? So there's Brazil. Actually, no, there's still three. So there is no
Okay.
footprint for Azure in Argentina. These
Gotcha.
little blue things you see, that's Colombia. Those are networking pops. So
Gotcha.
basically, from a networking point of view, if computer science were the only thing that would matter, then that would be acceptable. But data
Right.
residency is the issue. So if I go here to US East 1, right,
Yep.
it'll tell you that its location is Virginia and it's stored at rest in the United States.
Hmm.
Like here, um, is there any more details? There isn't. US
Yeah,
East.
they used to. Yeah, they don't talk much about that, about where they are. But one
So
of the
look, this
U.S.
is
East.
Georgia. One of the
Yep.
US East 2 is down in Danville, isn't it?
There or Mecklenburg, I forget which.
It's interesting that they chose a picture of Richmond.
Right.
Um,
I mean, these are with we kind of touched briefly on politics in a geopolitical slash sovereignty strategic way.
right.
These are huge, and I know I'm not the
Well,
one thinking about it, but
look at this. I
yeah,
mean,
there's one in Israel. Those
there's
satellites,
only,
Frank, are getting it. By the way, those
yeah.
satellites on the graphic, those things are moving at way faster than normal satellites. I'm
Oh,
just saying.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, satellites are going to change things, but like in terms of where the data
Yes.
sits at rest is really where, because ultimately I think it really boils down to when are the local police going to barge down a door with a court, hopefully with a court order, and basically copy everything, right? That's really what matters, right?
Right.
That
Right.
turns out that's really what ended up mattering. But if you look at the Middle East, right, like 1, 2, 3 countries have it, right?
Hmm.
And that entire region, obviously with geopolitical tensions being what they have been for a number of years,
Yeah.
moving your data center to any one of these countries may be an issue for you or
Yep.
your organization or your regulatory, right? Europe is kind of the same thing, right? Where, you know, there's Switzerland, there's Italy, and I know that there's different kind of things in terms of Germany. Um, it was actually, I don't know if it still is now, but it might have been I used to live in Frankfurt actually. Um,
Yeah.
there was actually what they call a sovereign cloud because there was
Hmm.
concerns that if it was a U.S. company owning a data center, that U.S. courts would have jurisdiction there, which is a brilliant move by a past administration. I say brilliant sarcastically in case you didn't pick up on that, where they thought that they could basically issue a court order to demand something from here in Ireland, and Microsoft fought that because they realized, look, wait a minute, that would mess up our entire. That would cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they dropped the case before it was finally decided. But in order to make it thing, at one point anyway, this is actually owned by a German company, managed by a German company, and just leased to Microsoft to
Gotcha.
have that concern. I think China
I
also
was
operates the same way.
Frank. I was commenting on the satellites on the graphic there.
Oh, that they were moving around. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they are moving very, very fast.
And keep they're moving much faster. But I mean, keep in mind though, keep in mind though that we're just talking about data residency. There's other things
Right.
that if you're building a real solution, there's other things to consider,
Yeah.
right? Like
And there's a whole lot to that. And
latency. Yeah,
yeah, oh, absolutely. And
like
part of it is part of what happens when you start kind of going back to the data engineering platforms and stuff that you use. There are sound business reasons for not making a change, and there are some unsound business reasons that will confine you to not making a change. And I think about this. I'll put it in the context of SQL Server. Companies will come up and this has happened, and I still have clients running applications on old servers because the company they serve, their clients include enterprises that care an awful lot about checking boxes and auditability and all of that stuff, regulatory type things, which is not bad. It's just the way that it is. That's their business demands something like this. These companies were formed, they were stood up, and they've got SQL Server 2005 running, or 2008, or stuff that's been out of the maintenance cycle at Microsoft for a long time.
An unknown. It's also not a well-known fact that if you don't want to upgrade to version X or Y, you can pay extra money, and Microsoft will maintain and provide you patches. Right? There's rumors that there's, at least as of a few years ago, there were still Windows 95 systems that were, and that sounds absurd.
Yeah.
But
you walk down the entry to Delta Flight, and there was Windows. What was it? Windows 97, I think, sitting there.
98, yeah.
98 was it? Yeah, Windows 98. Sorry, yeah, Windows 98 boxes sitting there for the longest time. They're still, I believe, they're Windows 7 now. Still,
XP. I saw XP.
Or XP. You're right. It is XP. Yeah. So, you just I kind of noticed this, like, wow, I hadn't seen that in a while. But it's not about will the new technology run that SQL Server 2005 database. The answer is clearly yes.
Well, you can always virtualize something, right? Like that's something that
I mean, there's that. Compatibility levels help.
Right.
There's a number of things that do it. But here's the kicker. If the application is not certified to run on that, and you can change it, and maybe you have changed it and tested it and go, yeah, it works. We'll just move it to, SQL Server 2019 or 2022. We know it works. But the people you're serving, people who care way more about checking all the boxes and the regulations being 100% and auditable, they won't allow you to. And it gets even more complex when that company that originally sold you that software 20 years ago is no longer in business.
Right.
So you have no path forward. I mean, they get
bought by another company that you don't really like.
Exactly.
That's happened too.
Exactly.
A lot of mainframe companies were bought up by, I don't want to name names, but were brought up, and it really was ironically, because they knew they had them. And ironically, a lot of mainframe migrations happened because of that. It was.
And so you've got that angle where people are sticking with older systems for whatever reason. Right. And it's, it goes like I'm saying, my point is that this goes beyond just the data engineering realm. There are compelling reasons to use older software. It may not be anybody's, satisfactory answer, but it is, those reasons exist. And if you're if you're a developer who likes using the new shiny and learning the new stuff, I'm one of those. That's why I'm teaching courses on Fabric Data Factory right now and watching as it kind of, some days it works and some days it doesn't. We've had that happen on a number of deliveries this year with that. So if you read what I wrote about this and you come away with Andy's against the new stuff, well, you're just as wrong can be. That's not the
Well,
case at all.
you know, it's an interesting. I mean, so back to the lecture at hand, what kind of kicked this all off and inspired this
Sure.
stream was this post where I think the short answer is everybody's a little right, everybody's a little wrong. And as a consultant, you can appreciate these two words, it depends. Right? Because
Yeah.
like you may want to upgrade to the new shine. I know every developer wants to do that. And I think the comment for some reason I can't say is like basically hiring managers will put in the job description all there's also the other matter of job descriptions and job requirements are
They're always 100% accurate. That's been my
disconnected from
experience.
consensus reality, I
Yes.
like to say. But they may want someone with like say ADF and this, but then actually have them working on systems in SSIS because the hiring manager knows that he or she may not have that open rec for a while and has in the back of the mind the idea of moving to that someday.
Sure.
But realistically, for the next 2 years, you're going to be working in SSIS.
Yeah.
I mean,
And there are still large consulting companies out there that develop brand new applications in SSIS, brand new data engineering,
I
data
can do you one
warehouses.
worse than that, or one better, depending on your point of view. A few years ago, I think it was on .NET Rocks, they were talking about telemetry from Visual Studio. And this
Mm,
back when I cared about Windows client development. Basically, WPAF came out in 2006, 2007, right?
mhm,
XAML, no, not XAML. Metro or Modern Applications (UWP) came out in 2011, 2012, right? So
mhm.
there's been multiple frameworks to write when, and there's been a number since, but again, don't really care about Windows client development anymore. Um, um, Windows Forms is still the number one of all those like ways to develop Windows applications that run on the Windows box. Windows
Mhm.
Form is still accounts for 80% of development.
Wow.
Something
Wow.
someone's going to like please email me and hate mail, not hate mail, but like tell me the exact number. But it
Correct
was
Frank
still
if he's off.
well, and they
Yes.
kept saying in Visual Studio 2005 came out. They said this is it. This is the end of the line for Windows Forms. We're not updating. We're not adding anything, and the future is WPF from now on, right? Until the future became something else. And then when I last installed, I think it was Visual Studio 2016, 2019, there was they added stuff to Windows Forms, which is kind of
Sure.
funny because they said they never would.
Yeah.
But it just
Well,
goes to show you
customer
that
demand, right?
customer demand, ultimately, customer demand is what pays the bill. So you got to be very mindful of that. And
Yeah.
if it's 2024 and you're writing a Windows Forms app, I have questions. Like I not saying I disagree, but I have many questions.
Yeah.
Arguably, you could say the same thing for UWP or WPF, right? You
Yeah.
know, but again, it really depends. Like in the last time I had worked with WPF professionally it was for when I was at a uh, between my stints at Microsoft, and there was a customer who was a mortgage company, and they basically had their mortgage intake form written in WPF, right? And they were having performance issues with it. And I
Mm,
looked at the code and I was like, this is a good lesson, I think, is that, they loaded up like some 700 controls all at once, right?
wow.
Because there were a lot of fields but they were all collapsed and things like that. And I was like, well, I'm looking at this and I'm like testing it and I'm like, oh dear God, this is going to be a nightmare because it's 600 controls. You could do lazy loading and things like that, but then
Sure.
there could be unintended consequences there. Then I happen to notice when I load the app, the CPU spikes, but the GPU was hardly touched. Which the whole promise of WPF was that it would offload as much of the rendering
Yeah.
over to the GPU as possible because it was
Wow.
basically built on XNA, which was a gaming
Mm.
framework. But that again, different sidetrack, and different lifetime ago. Uh, so I'm like, what the heck's going on? So then I'm like, I looked at some of the machines. I'm like, they had the generic GPU driver. So I'm like,
Oh,
just for grins, let me see if I can get the proper driver for this device. All of a sudden, the 30, 40 seconds it took to load that initial screen went down to 5 seconds.
wow.
And
That's a big jump.
that was a big jump. And that was like, and I said to the guy, it's like, look, just installing this driver, you get a, massive increase in things, right? Do you really want to architect it, or are you trying to you want this to be faster? Like, what's
Yeah.
considered acceptable? And he said, well, under 10 seconds would be acceptable. And I was like, I could do you better. How about 5.5?
Right.
And I showed him, and he goes, well, not everybody has a GPU in their device. And I was like, well, like, this GPU costs about, I think, 189. For some reason, 189 stuck under $200.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you'd have to install it. You have to think about the labor of installing like this cheap GPU, right? And he goes, that's fine. He goes, look, the cost of redeveloping and re-architecting and retesting this versus $200 per box, plus whatever it takes for somebody to go in with a screwdriver and update the drivers.
Right. Right.
It was so like we ended up not having to touch the code at all, right? It
Yeah.
was just a
Wow.
matter of a driver update, which
Nice.
because it was like a fixed price kind of support contract, I was the hero because I solved the problem with about 3 to 5 hours of work.
Nice.
And the customer was happy because they didn't have to re-architect anything.
Everybody wins.
Everybody wins.
I
And it was
love it
kind
when
of
that
like,
happens.
but it just goes to show you like sometimes the most cost effective approach is to not touch
And
anything.
and it's although it was a relatively small amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
and a manageable amount of time for the client. Um, Sometimes, if you look at the, kind of the big performance tuning picture, and I ran into some of this in the past where,
Well, it's not always a
as,
happy ending.
as an engineer, I want to fix the thing that I'm engineering, and if it's software, then I want to make the software perform better. And if it's so I went through one of those experiences, and then number of circumstances where, but the end result was we we threw money at it and bought better discs. And
I
when
remember
I
you
did,
telling me about this. I remember you telling me this a
oh,
long
it's a
time ago.
specific long story, but yeah, it's back from about 12 years ago.
Yeah, you were
Well,
like, you just
or
bought
longer.
SSDs and it got fast
Yeah.
enough.
And so when I did the math on that, was an enterprise level project. There were dozens of people tuning on a Tiger team, and we did make it go faster. And as a test, what I did was I rolled the code back to where it was when we started,
I will say
and
now though, the term Tiger Team, after my
nobody knows what I
experiences,
mean. Sorry.
I know
A
what you
group
mean. I
a
know what you
group of
mean, but
individuals, dozens
yeah.
of individuals focused on solving a particular problem. It's like
Although in some cases,
swarming,
focused
maybe.
on not solving a particular problem, but that's a story for another day.
Different story. You're right, but yeah, we did, and I rolled everything back and ran the old code that we had optimized. It ran super fast on the SSDs, and it was running okay. It was acceptable, barely
Right.
on the spindles, but when we rolled it back, it was the same difference. We actually got a touch more performance just off the SSDs, and when you do the math on that, at that time SSDs were rather new, and the amount that I wanted was not trivial. I asked for it on a lark, and I was surprised when it showed up.
So she
But
did work for Microsoft.
okay, I'm not surprised. Kendra is scary smart. She did consulting. Brent's name came up a few times. She worked with
Yeah.
Brent for a while,
She worked at Redgate.
and
Not everyone knows what Redgate is, but they're kind of a big deal in the safety
yeah,
server
yeah,
world.
they're a big
So
deal.
like clearly like I just find it, I'd love to get her like initial opinion after factoring in all of this is that, you know, ironically saying don't run after every shiny thing, but the thing that guy that was originally learning is the new shiny thing, ironically. Like so there's a lot
Could
of
be,
layers
yeah.
to this. There's
There
even
is.
even if you take this kind of at face value, not knowing the context, there's a lot of layers. But like beyond that, there's even more layers. Like it becomes this multi-dimensional problem
It's true.
space.
It's like an ogre.
Many
Many
layers, many
layers, like
onions.
an
I was wondering when
onion
we were going to
and
have a
an
movie
ogre.
reference because it's been a
There
while.
we go. Boom.
Even on the main
Shrek's a
show,
classic.
Shrek is a classic. The sequel's not so much, but that's a common case.
True.
I'm
Very,
looking at
very
you,
true.
Matrix movies. I'm looking at you.
It was, I saw the activity on this, and especially because since I posted this, I can see how many people looked at that. The link I sent you for the other one is kind of the one that started it. I don't know if you have that link in chat. If you wanted to click on
I
that,
have
that was a
this thing.
few days, maybe a week before this. That was the first one I commented. It was similar sentiment, and I shared. Again, I joined the conversation, and then
Is this
LinkedIn
one
will
about
do
is
this.
SSIS dead?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
So that particular one has gotten like probably 12 to 15 times as many views. It's
Yeah, but
older.
you
And it
mentioned
was the
this.
first time I had piped up about anything like this. I commented on the original one. LinkedIn will pop this up if you write a lengthy comment like that one. And I said,
That windowing
it's
system looks like Windows XP era.
well, that's SSIS. That is
No,
a
it's just funny. Like it's just funny how.
yeah.
But
And I commented, and Windows LinkedIn popped up and said, "Hey, do you want to repost this since you wrote this comment?" And I said, "Sure." And it just pastes the comment up at the top of the
right.
repost. But I can see like the number of people and that one drew a lot more comments, and like I said, 12 to 15 times the views. And I communicated with the original author just a touch about that at all. It went nowhere near as I'm trying to think of the right word. Nowhere. It didn't get nearly as heated. I'll say it that way. And it may just be that I'm saying heated, but there's one individual in particular
People
who
get very
just
passionate about the tools that they use
just
for
got.
work.
I wanted to ask that individual, how many SSIS packages they developed and put into production. Because I would again, I think I know the answer to that,
This
and I've
this
had
individual or a different
conversations like
individual?
that. Say that again.
Which individual?
Not in that one.
Oh, but
Not it's
I
in the
think
other
this is
thread, the one
interesting.
we've been looking at.
This angle
Yeah.
here, though, right? Nothing against GUI ETL tools, but he
Yeah.
appreciates. So
Well,
this
I'm
is
thinking
another layer.
notebooks.
This is an argument of GUI versus
Yeah.
straight
Yeah.
code. I think that's also an interesting concept
Low
too. Right?
code, no code versus,
I mean, I like them both, but
I do too. It's for me, it's which solution matches best. And as a consultant who goes to work with other companies a lot,
right.
a big factor for me is,
What they have.
what happens when I'm gone?
Right.
Can you support it? What are you most familiar with? Even if I'm working in a technology like SSIS, there's really a couple of ways you can float it.
That's
Okay,
true.
John,
Shrek 2 was good. I'm
you're
referring to
right.
3, and I think there was a fourth one.
Oh, really? I didn't even know there was a
Yeah.
fourth one. So there you go. But in SSIS, you can take a more
And the Matrix 2 was good
sequel.
as well. Matrix 2 was good as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
You can take like a more DBA approach, a more T-SQL driven approach, or you can take a more .NET driven approach because you have both execute SQL tasks and SQL sources and destinations and transformations, and you have a script task and a script component. And which way do you go? Which is the right way to go? Well, it depends. If you've got a bunch of .NET developers being tasked with maintaining the ETL after I leave, no way. 5.
Good God, Shrek 5 or Matrix
Yeah,
5?
okay.
Either one sounds like a terrible idea.
But, whoever's going to be left behind supporting that, you got to make sure that
right.
you've done a fair enough job of representing their preferences on that. And I know consultants who come in and say, we got to do it this way, and you're bad and wrong, and you're going to go out of business in 18 months if you don't listen to me.
Right.
I
also think too, like when I first read it, I'm sorry.
I don't say hire somebody else.
Right. I mean, when I first read it as should you learn SQL?
Okay.
right? And that's a big debate in the data science community is should data
Yeah.
scientists learn SQL because Python can do everything, which is true. No knock on my Python can do everything. Should you use Python for everything? I think is another question, right? And I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think
That's fair.
if you're a data scientist or even an AI kind of engineer, whatever the
Yeah.
word is this week, um, you should still learn SQL because it's way less complicated than anything else you're doing, and two, it's kind of the lingua franca of anything data or data interaction,
Yeah.
right? Uh,
And again, Frank, the context comes into play here.
Right,
There's the mechanical tool. It's describing a software, a language as mechanical is one way of looking at it. But
right.
there's also the problem you're trying to solve. And if you're going to do data exploration or munging or whatever you want to call it, then I don't really care which mechanism you use. But don't tell me one of these mechanisms is better than the other. It, there,
Without a
if,
qualifier,
for this particular
right?
task, yeah. So it could be that one of them is good at this one particular thing, and I would argue this. I did in my newsletter. Shrek 5. Okay, in my newsletter, I argued every single tool has something that they're stronger in. There's some feature or some aspect of it that's better than all of the others, and they also have some weakness that's worse than all of the others.
It's true.
And so you gotta strike that balance. It's going to depend on your use case, the parameters, the things that are important to you. Sometimes it's cash on hand. Sometimes it's the servers hardware that you're forced to work with because you're owned by somebody and they're not upgrading. They're not
Or
giving
the
you the best.
staffing concerns,
The people, their experience, their
right?
languages that they're
Well, how
familiar
easy
with.
is it to find someone that
All of that.
necessarily knows SQL versus knows Python, or the bill rate for someone that knows SQL is probably going to be different than the person who knows pandas.
I
You
think
know,
so.
and those
I
both.
think there are differences there, but again, it's going to depend on the company.
It's true.
You're
And
worth
our job market.
right. You're worth
Mhm.
more to this company as a SQL developer than maybe than a Pandas developer is to that company. That's a possibility. Go where you get paid the most, but realize, especially if you're new, and I think that person that in Kendra's original post that she was jamming on that that was a different scenario. And you're right. There's a number of squirrely things about that original post, but um, if you're a young developer and just getting started, you're in college. I've got a daughter studying computer science in college right now. And my recommendation to her is first learn everything that you can. Do as much as absolutely as you can. Pick up that knowledge, but um, be aware that there's more to it than just the brain exercise you get and the thrill you get from seeing the code execute. Keep that thrill, keep that spark
Right,
alive.
right, right, right.
But you know, realize there's often more to it, and some of those factors you have no control over, and the person you're working for has no control over. And there's just a number of things totally external to the experience of writing code that often impact the experience of writing code.
That's very true. That's very true.
So,
Well,
gosh,
we've been
Frank, we've
going
gone
on for
long.
like 90 minutes. So
Wow.
I
Goodness, it doesn't
know.
seem like it.
I've had this much coffee and I still don't have to go to the bathroom. That's amazing. It's a Christmas
I'm proud of
miracle.
you.
It's a Festivus miracle or a Christmas miracle. I don't know.
Awesome.
But so this has been great. I think we kind of got to the bottom of this is that basically it's a nuanced conversation. There's no simple
That's fair.
answer. I
Yeah.
have many questions though. Why, if you're learning LLMs and ML, why are you calling yourself a data engineer? But
Yeah.
it
That's a
could just
different
be
thing.
semantics. Could just be semantics at that point.
Could be.
Um, but thanks, John. Thanks, Meredad. Thanks, Hector and SQL Dev DBA. I'm sure that's not the name on the driver's license, but you never know.
You never know.
I want to get a license plate holder that has like a drop table, like so that way when they take a picture and they do the OCR, boom.
I've seen the bumper stickers with longer
Right.
SQL hacks on them, SQL injection
There you
attacks.
go. Hey, man,
And
anytime. Thanks for tuning in. And he legally changed his name. That's cool. Apparently, there's a number of people who have like a last name, and their last name is Null.
oh wow.
And I look it up on YouTube. Like, there's like a number of like problems that people have. And my first
That's
thought
funny.
was, wait, wouldn't that only be the case if they encased it in quotes or single quotes? Like, wouldn't it? But apparently, no. Like, some of these systems,
Depends.
I mean, you want to talk old systems. I'm sure DMVs have some pretty ancient technologies that are
So
still
true.
running. I mean, I can only imagine. Robert Tables, yes, little Bobby Tables.
Little Bobby Tables. That's the one.
I tried to name my kid something like that, but
You got overruled, if I remember correctly.
I did in so many ways. I'm glad I didn't go with the initials of XAML.
Yeah,
That
you
turned
could
out to
have.
be Xavier Anthony Marcus was on the table.
See, and Lavinia,
And Lavinia, yeah.
that would just flow. That would be your L.
Fortunately, though, since XAML kind of died, it's probably a good thing.
That's true.
So XML is even not as in vogue as it once was.
Well, our mutual friend, Mr. Kevin Hazard, aka the Duke of Hazard, he says JSON is just hipster XML.
He's right though. And
I
there's
think
another
so.
format called JSON-L.
What?
Yeah, JSON lines.
Never even heard of that.
I didn't hear about it until the product I work on, Rel AI, actually uses it to store our data. And basically,
So what's different between JSON and JSON-L?
Basically, it's a long line where each line is a record of or a chunk of JSON. That's how I interpret it. I'm sure I'll get corrected, but please correct me on that one.
Interesting.
But yeah, I'm like, JSON-L? Like, what the heck? JSON is an acceptable one. That's true. Jason would have been a good name. But I didn't want him to get teased on Friday the 13th for the rest of his life. So thanks everyone for tuning in, man. This was awesome. We should do it more often. Thumbs up on or be sure to like, share, subscribe. I got to go through all the things. Yep. Like, share, and subscribe. I can show off this little graphic.
Frank, we could do this. We could do this a lot more often. If anytime I stir up some trouble, we do a live stream.
Oh God, we do it every day.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No, I think it's interesting. I think it's good because, like, the controversy. I think people are starting. Last time I looked at the thread thoroughly. Like, people were talking past each other.
Yeah,
which I guess defines all of Reddit, most of the internet. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But cool, man. I gotta actually, now that I mentioned, I do have to go to the restroom.
See, you did it to yourself.
I did do it to myself, and thank you, Merdad, for tuning in. And I will play the outro graphic.
Excellent.